Good morning, everybody. I know it's not morning for everybody, but it's Sabbath morning here. And here is Arkansas in the United States. Let's open with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, we want to thank you as you continue to teach us the truth as we're confronted with our own emotional response to that truth. We are still grappling with our own response to the changes that are happening in our lives. Our understanding of what is right and what is wrong is still fragile. We ask that you would continue to guide and direct us, and that we would be patient with one another in this process of growth. In Jesus' name, we ask for blessing today. Amen. So this is the second camp meeting in This is the second camp meeting in the United States. Last week we were in Florida. This week we're in Arkansas. As we did last week, we have an in-person meeting here, and we're going to go ahead. And we're going to have a discussion amongst ourselves with translation, of course. At least for the time being, I'm going to carry on the discussion that we had last week. You remember the conversation began with a question of how a member would behave on the Sabbath. It's about Sabbath observance. And the question was centered around this person's schooling or their college. And rather than simply answer the person's question about the rules and regulations of Sabbath keeping, I hope we can all remember that I suggested the more interesting question was why the member was asking that question in the first place. Like many of you, I've been an Adventist for many years. They've been in the movement for a long time. And I think it's fair and reasonable to say that the vast majority of us, if not all of us, know the rules and regulations of Sabbath keeping. So on the surface, the question might appear redundant. Because we should all know the answer to that question. So our discussion was focused upon why the question was being asked. I don't know what was in the mind of the person who was asking it. I didn't consult with them, so we are assuming some things. And a principle that I think all of us are aware of but sometimes we may forget is that the personal is political. So I just want to ask what that means for some people here. Because some people flip that phrase around and say the political is the personal. So there are two key words, personal and political. So I just want to ask people what they understand that phrase or term to mean. Bob, how do you understand that phrase? Just so somehow, when I ask a question and you have to give a second for the translation. Okay. Translate to speak. So,
to me, it means that your understanding is universal. You don't have a personal life that's segregated from what you understand politically and the events that are externally happening.
So Bob said that you can't separate your personal experience, your personal views, from what you see in the world, politically and socially speaking. Is that fair representation?
Yes.
You want to say some more?
Not right now.
Okay. Sarah, what do you understand the personal is the political to mean?
Well, what I understand is what I think means privately is the views should be the same as what is happening externally, right? In the world.
Just say that again. What affects you personally?
Yeah, it's also the same as what is happening in public. You can't separate the two.
So Sarah said, what affects her personally is the same thing that affects people publicly. And you can't separate them. Anyone else? Does anyone else want to give their understanding of personal is political?
Maybe it's the wording.
I'm just going to go with Linda because I want. Okay, then. Linda,
Well, mine's a little more simplistic.
just a little bit louder.
Mine's a little more simplistic than others. You live up to what you believe, you know, what you believe in your heart is how you live and they all touch. And if you have a good understanding politically of what is right and wrong, when you're living up to that, you know, through your actions.
Okay, so Linda said the personalist political means when you see what's happening in the world in politics, you align your personal life with what's correct and right politically and socially. Is that a fair representation? Okay. Alyssa?
That a person's, the personal principles are reflected in a person's dealings with others.
So I think Alyssa said something really similar to what Linda said. So I'm not going to repeat what she said. And someone online said, I wish I was there to answer in person. So I do understand the stress that people online are feeling because they're all shouting their answers out and I'm not able to hear. So I apologize for that. Okay, anyone else? So is the word political a good word in that statement? So we've got no, yes, someone says yes, someone says no. Yes. So it depends. Okay, so there's a mixture of yes and no. I guess it depends upon what a person understands the phrase even to mean. So I'm going to try to collect those thoughts together. Without imprinting, which is difficult, my own thoughts. So all of us experience the world. We interact with it. And by the world, I mean society. And if I were to put it simply, society is managed or controlled by the government. And even in a country like the United States, which promotes the idea that they have government, who can finish the last bit? Loud? By the people, for the people. One more. Okay, so we'll begin. You have government of the people. So the government comes from the people. Second one. by the people. That means the people elect the government. And the third one, for the people. So the government, so the government serves the people. And we call that a democracy. So even though if we were to say that the United States is the epitome of good governance, those three, the ethos of the American system, those 3 points, do they actually work or not? So sometimes, no. You've got to speak loud. Depends. Depends. So I'm going to suggest if we look over the last 8 years, perhaps.
No.
It doesn't really work. And I think that's being generous if we only go 8 years, because we can go further back and see it doesn't really work. The idea of the popular vote and the electoral college, the fact that however we do the math, half of the country didn't want that government in office. However far you go back, it's always around half the people don't want that government. So for good or bad, even though there's this high calling that it's society that controls the government, remember those 3 things? The reality is that the government controls society. Human beings have a way of manipulating people. And what's even worse about that is that many of us like to be manipulated. It's an easier life to let someone else do all the thinking. So I understand a representative government works, but it's filled with problems. And we need to recognize that our movement also has all of those built-in problems too. It's not that the leadership were voted in or not voted in. That's not the problem. It's just that it's very difficult to have governance or representation that fully reflects the needs or the wants of the society or the members in this case. Back to our point. It seems that the word political is a reasonable word to use in that phrase. because it's a synonym for society or the world. Because what really controls society and directs it is the government. So the personal, I'm not going to spend much time on because that's relatively straightforward, I think. So we're going to look at this problem from the negative, which is what we often do. We're not going to see the benefits of it. We're going to see the bad side. So each of us, when we look at our lives and things don't go well, how did I get into a bad marriage? Why have my children turned out this way? The obvious answer is because I'm a bad parent. Why is my health not good? Because I eat bad food. Why did I not get that job? Because I'm not educated. Because I'm lazy at school. Everything that I've described just there are all personal issues, personal problems. They're all my faults. And if I were a better person, I wouldn't be in that mess. If only I had made good decisions, or I had been, yeah, we'll just leave it at that. I'd made good decisions. So most people view the world that way. And then someone had this thought. It wasn't the first person to have this thought. This idea has been permeating humanity for millennia. But the phrase is quite recent, relatively speaking, and it's in vogue, at least in the movement. Because it's in vogue among radical feminists. Sarah, all of those things I've just described I'm in this mess because I'm a bad person. What does this statement say to me? So Sarah says she's going to apply it to her life and she's going to ask herself, so where did she go wrong?
What choice? Or what choices could I have done better to change this situation?
Or what could she have done better so that she wouldn't be in this situation? Okay, so I'll be gentle, but I think that was the wrong answer. Because it's not the answer you gave originally. When I asked you the question at the beginning. Because you gave the right answer then. So someone else.
I'm not directly involved with this group, but I am married to somebody that is. And
So-
in my opinion,
So someone who's married to someone who's in the movement, their opinion is, I have to get it translated that you can't hear, I'm sorry. So we've got,
in my opinion, there is no bad decision
What-
because you learn from a bad decision. And if you don't
One
learn
second.
from a bad decision,
you have to stop, sorry. Sorry. We have a visitor. They're laughing. And he said, there is no bad decision because we can learn from our decisions. We can learn from our choices that we've made. So carry on.
I would say the negative point is when a person chooses not to learn from that decision.
Okay, so he says the reason it's negative is because we don't choose to learn. So all of that is true. So I'm responding to your point.
But
So I'm going to respond to your point. So all of that is true. But it doesn't address this issue that I want us to understand. Because the power of this idea is that the reason I'm in this mess is not because of me. It's not all those choices that I made that I've given examples of. The reason I'm in this mess is because of you folks. This is your fault, not my fault. And the reason I know that is because I had a secret meeting with some random people, and I asked them the same questions I asked myself. And lo and behold, completely different people are in the same mess that I am in. So we'll get a bit more specific. They weren't totally random people. They were all men. And all those men had messed up lives. And it dawned upon us, the thought came into our minds, in English, it dawned upon us. We had a realization that we had been lied to. Because all the women had told us, she told me, and it turned out that this other she told him. that the reason your life is a failure is because you were constructed that way. By design, by birth, men are just weak and feeble. And when I looked at my fellow brothers, they didn't appear that way to me. So what we all realized, and we could only have done that when we got together as men. Is that there's a conspiracy going on. Instigated by clever women who have foisted a lie upon us. And it's not my fault. It's the system. It's society. It's the government. Or the word we use, it's politics. I said I wasn't going to give too much of my own opinion, but I've probably given more than I should have done. But to redeem myself, I think that's what Sarah said at the very beginning. The reason each of us are in this situation it's not because we made all of these bad decisions and we can rectify them. It's that politics or the system is inherently opposed to us, against us. So obviously I flipped all of our story around. Because I wanted us to see the absurdity of the situation. So just for everybody online, we've got poor signal here, and I apologize for that. So I turned the story round because I wanted us to see the absurdity or the silliness of this. Because in the real world, it looks so normal. People, women, actually believe the problem is them. This problem has been going on for so long, 6 millennia. It's ingrained in women and men that this is normal. And I know we speak about culture as opposed to religion. I think I've spoken about them as the same coin, but the two faces of that coin. Because whether you go to the priesthood of the family of Aaron, or you go to evolutionary biology, you always get to the same place. that human brains are gendered. That by design, men and women are fundamentally different. So let me give an example. My personal position, my situation that I find myself in, all the examples I gave earlier, they're rooted in my societal or political situation. So I'm married and I'm in a relationship that has domestic violence. Which means 99% of the time I'm a woman. So why is that domestic violence going on? I know we sort of call it, we attribute this to cars, but maybe I just married a lemon or someone who was bad. Linda, why am I in this situation? Go ahead. Because society blamed women for everything.
What's the right?
Society.
Yeah.
So men feel enabled or they have a right to get back at women. Anything else? Okay, so that's why that violence happens. Kathy?
I just want to say that in my experiences with the women I've known involved in those situations, they were raised, abused, or violence perpetrated upon them as children. Excuse my voice.
So Kathy said that she knows women who are in that situation. And more often than not, they were brought up in abusive families.
And they don't know any different.
And those women don't know any different.
Just a personal situation is, I mean, a friend.
I won't go to personal ones if that's okay.
I mean, they go, and I know people that will continue even when they were almost killed.
Okay. So when they're in those bad marriages, they remain in those situations. They remain in that bad relationship. So we spoke about the women in that relationship. Never heard anything about the men. But why are the men doing that?
Wrong expectations. Wrong expectations.
The men have wrong expectations. Carol? So men don't speak, they don't know how to communicate. Okay, so I just want to add to that. I agree with those answers. I think what we need to get to grips with is that this is not a feeble woman marrying a bad man. It is that, but that's the personal dynamic. But it's not one couple or two or three. This is systemic. And depending on how you want to define abuse or what grade you want to give it, it's the majority of marriages. And so you come to two conclusions. Whether you're a religionist or a secularist. It's either by design so this is the way human beings are constructed. That men are inherently violent by design. And women are passive. So you either go down that model, or there's another model, which is what? So Alyssa said choice. I'm going to suggest it's not choice. I'm going to suggest those men are not making a choice to be violent to their wives. Because if it was that simple, it would be easily fixable. Kathy. Say the first bit.
Go to the government and make it political.
So we should look to the government and see it's a political issue. Bob?
Humanity's been marinating in society's undue influence.
So human beings have been victims for millennia of society. Sarah. So Sarah said it's bad training from childhood. Whose fault is that bad training?
Say, maybe if that child saw that from his parent,
So the parents are at fault?
well, I would say sometimes yes.
So if it's, Sarah said yes. So if it's the parents' fault, it's personal. It's not political. Sorry?
That was the
So Sarah said the personal and the political are the same. They can't be the same because what happens in society, 7 billion people isn't me. but they are related for sure. Okay, so we've spoken about society in a general way, but it's not like that, is it? This is men against women. That's what we're really speaking about. But part of the problem when we go down that narrative is that men are as much a victim of this issue as women are. Because of the bad upbringing that Sarah mentioned. Okay, so when there's domestic violence going on, yes, it's a personal issue. Not all men are abusers and not all women are abused. But if we don't see what's going on at the individual level as a wider societal problem, there's no way of fixing that problem. We have to see this as a systemic problem. So you've probably heard of the term institutional racism or systemic racism. David, what does that mean to you? Institutional or systemic racism?
It's the core of society. And people don't even realize that this is how they act.
So David said this is the core of society. And people don't realize how they act.
Goes up and down, will change society.
And that issue runs all the way through society from the top to the bottom. Okay, so I don't want to give examples particularly, but you may not be racist yourself, but you work for an organization or a government that approaches the problem based upon race. And therefore, even though you personally may not feel that way, the system or the company that you work for or society that you work for forces you to make decisions that are not good. So we'll talk about the same issue, but we'll digress slightly. Is capitalism opposed to feminism? So one person says yes, one person says no. So we're not sure between ourselves. So I have an idea of what capitalism is to me, but everybody may have their own views. So you have a company, I think you call it incorporated or limited or public company on the stock exchange. So it's not a state-owned enterprise. It's a privately owned enterprise. What drives that company? What's the driving force behind that? Someone say anything over here? Profit? Profit.
Taking advantage of the situation.
So Bob said taking advantage of the situation, which sounds bad. But when they said profit, that sounds pretty good to me. So I don't want to put any morality on it. So this company that's on the stock exchange is driven to make money, to make profit. Is that right or wrong, Bob?
Not wrong if they're not. It's not wrong if they're not. Keep the advantage for the people in the process. But again, you need morality out of it. So in that sense, it's not wrong.
So in that sense, it's not wrong. It's all good. And I want to remind everyone here that all your pensions are derived from this process. When you give money into the bank, whether it's short-term or via a pension, you're buying into the capitalist model. The only thing you care about is that Apple makes a profit forever. So that you can get a pension at the end of the day. And by the way, when you give your money to Social Security, that mechanism is exactly the same. So the problem obviously is with that model, if you hire a woman, that woman is a liability. Perhaps on various levels, but the most obvious one is what? Childbirth, pregnancy. It's the obvious one. And it's not just the 3 months of pregnancy that they're going to be off work. It's not, whatever the number is, it's not the 6 months after birth that she's going to take off work. So it's not just that 9 months. because the company recognizes that she's going to be distracted. For the next 18 years. So she affects the bottom line. The profit. She affects the profit. I've spoken about capitalism, but whether you go to Russia or China, or some Latin American country, South America, I should say South American country. So whether you go to socialism or communism, don't be deceived by their lies. Because they're all driven by the same mechanism. It's all about profit. And what does radical feminism teach? What is radical feminism, the model? What does that mean to you? I said, are you a radical feminist? You said, yes. What does that mean? And remember, the person is political. We're talking about politics now, or society. At that level, what does a radical feminist do? What does that society look like? Linda.
So that feminist can be something different from cultural feminist. If they're not going to give in, you know.
I'm going to stop you there. My question is, we worked out what capitalism is, what that society looks like. It's about profit. To make sure everything sort of moves along smoothly. But we see people get hurt by that. So what's a radical feminist society look like? So Linda said a radical feminist society is, she said like, I'm just going to take the like out, is socialism. Is that, so you would say radical feminism is socialism? Okay, anyone else? Alyssa. So Alyssa says, advocate human rights over profit. So I guess in our little group, a few of us, maybe a quarter, I don't know the number, are retired. Can you put your hands up if you were willing to lose half of your pension, whatever your pension number is, half of that to follow Alyssa's suggestion? Only the ones who have. Alyssa said we should put human rights over profit. And I've asked the people who are receiving a pension, would they be willing to only have half of that pension to fulfill Alyssa's dream? Okay, so I've got no hands up. Oh, I've got one hand up. One person said yes, they would. They'd be willing to half their pension to have human rights upheld. Bob, you would say yes, you would, or?
No, my thoughts are going elsewhere. I'm going to keep on.
Okay. So I don't know how many people here are retired, but only one person has said yeah, they'd be willing to do that. And fundamentally, that's the problem that we are facing. That when we look at radical feminism, and I'm not saying this is the definition, but Alyssa has suggested that radical feminism is human rights. And as soon as you prioritize that, it hurts financially. And even though we love the theory, maybe we don't relish the reality. And that's something that we have to really get to grips with personally and as a movement. Because it's not just about money. I've just targeted money. That's only one issue. Because to turn a large ship round is not only slow, it has to be done. It takes a long time for that to happen. And many changes need to happen. And I think as a movement, our issue isn't financial. Because we're not an incorporated company, so it's not. We don't have a financial model. But we're not doing well on other aspects about switching from a capitalist model to a radical feminist model. Because capitalism isn't just about the bottom line. It's not just about profit. I targeted that one because it's easy. I'm just going to deal with one more, if I can remember. Kathy?
Fine.
You had your hand raised, yeah.
Well, my question was, does socialism work?
Okay, so Kathy's asking, does socialism work? So Linda mentioned that radical feminism looked like socialism. And I didn't go down that route to unpackage that or deconstruct it. But I know that many people would have their doubts about the validity of a socialist model. I wasn't going to explore that, if that's okay.
It just would, like, perhaps my answer different, but. Capitalism, socialism, communism. Communism doesn't work.
So Kathy said that capitalism, socialism, communism doesn't work. None of them work. And I think earlier I did suggest that they're all based around making money, even though that they profess that they're not. Another problem with the capitalist model is it's based upon an evolutionary model. Carol, you said yes. What do you think that means to you? Okay, that's fine. So I'll tell you my thoughts. The evolutionary model is built upon one premise, even though they say it's not anymore. It's survival of the fittest. And that's what capitalism is. And I think if you spent the time, if we discussed it, we would see that this organization, this movement is built upon that model, survival of the fittest. How do you, Bob denies that. Bob says no, he didn't see it. I'll give you my evidence. I could be wrong. Leadership in this movement were never voted upon. How do you become a leader in this movement, a mover and a shaker?
No more than others.
You know more than others. So either you've got more presence, you've got more skills, or you're a better teacher. I think they're all facets of the fittest people. Are the ones that get percolated up to the top. That's what I meant by survival of the fittest. Now what do you think, Bob?
The movement may well be unduly influenced by cultural and society, but it's not the way God wants it to work.
So before I translate that, are you saying we're not doing well? You agree with me and that we should be better? Or I'll translate all this in a minute.
We need to recognize complete equality, and that doesn't even fit in any of the other models that the world functions under. Like you said, turning the ship around, how much time would it take to do that?
So Bob says we shouldn't be influenced by society. We shouldn't be following its models, its premises. We all agree on that. My question is, are we doing well or not well in this movement?
Not so well, in some ways.
So Bob agrees we're not doing well. I want to ask one last question before we close. So we all agree that survival of the fittest is our model. My second question is that good or bad or necessary, or what else can we do? So if we go ahead. I made it sound all negative. Only the best people get the high places. Is that bad? Is it wrong? Quick show of hands. Sarah, wrong? Sarah says yes. Wrong. Wrong. It's right. Not sure. Right. Right.
It's necessary.
Right.
It is important that those people take proper morals with them.
Sure. We want good leaders,
Yes.
but they've got to be clever,
And
competent.
They have to take morals that will help everybody with them when they're at the top. Because if they take morals that will not help everybody, then it becomes a negative impact on the entire community.
Good.
So I say that it's right under a great condition.
So David says it's right. Sorry, I don't remember your name.
Right.
And Ron said it was okay as long as people are morally good.
Say that getting to the top is right under the condition that, and I think we all understand this, that God is the one doing the percolating and raising the leadership. It's not just secular, like, oh, they're smarter, you know, and I agree that's part of the equation.
So Bob says, sorry, David said, that system is good. And the reason it's okay is because God is doing the filtering. My only response to that, I wish it were true.
I believe.
Kathy, is it good or bad, this system we have?
I really don't know.
Kathy says she wasn't sure. Okay, so we've got a mixed response here. Individually, we're all radical feminists, apparently. But politically, we don't have the same view of what radical feminism is. And that should be troubling to us. And it's not a criticism. The best that anybody got to about describing radical feminism besides the human rights model when a description was given to it, the closest we got was socialism. So one of the points I want us to see is that this movement does not know what radical feminism is, beyond the personal. And that's really important, I think, for us to have that realization. Okay, we're going to close now, but I just want to bring things together. We had a personal question. Can I go to class on the Sabbath? And I suggested that this was a political question, a societal one, I mean, of course. Society, the definition meaning this movement, that's the context of society. I suggested, and I think I've been proven correct, I'm just going to say movement instead of political now. This movement's views on the Sabbath are changing. It's not one person's question about food. Another person's questions about education. A third one about work. Or a fourth person's question about cleanliness. Being clean. Bathing on the Sabbath. These are not individual personal issues. There's a political or movement-wide change happening. And I'm not saying it's good, and I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's right, and I'm not saying it's wrong. But many members, as they're commenting, are making those positions that it's right, it's wrong, it's good, it's bad. And I gave some evidence. People might not see it as evidence, but at least I gave context of why I think it's a political or a societal or a movement issue. And the reason I gave is that in Spiritual Gifts, chapter 33, Spiritual Gifts, volume 1, chapter 33, which is the same as early writings, no chapter number, chapter title, The Sins of Babylon. Ellen White says the sin is what? It's the sin of slavery. 3 chapters later, in 36, the time of trouble, she says, the reason you're in trouble is not because you're a slaveholder or an abolitionist. Obviously, the context would be because you're an abolitionist. The context is Sabbath. And so there's this dichotomy or problem between Ellen White's model of, we'll call it the 1850 history, and the model that we have, where the test is, we'll call it human rights or equality, or sexism, and the Sabbath is just an appendage. It's some added thought. And as soon as you start doing that, I think, I don't know what you think, but we get into theological, doctrinal, prophetic problems. Could be wrong, but that's the concern that I have. Let's close with prayer. Dear Lord, I believe each of us understands what it means to be a radical feminist. As it relates to our personal autonomy. I want to be treated fairly and equally. I thank you that you treat me that way. I want to treat my fellow members that way too. But we have been taught, and I believe, that the political is the personal. But I don't know what a radical feminist movement looks like. I don't know how to construct one from the ashes of this current model that we live in. My prayer, I hope it's the prayer of each of us, is that you would give us the wisdom and the foresight the understanding and the strength to make those changes. We need to understand, but above all, we need to have wisdom to correctly apply the information that we need to have. Help us to become radical feminists as a movement, and to stop seeing this as a personal issue. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you very much, Elder Parminder.
Thank you much. I'm not sure who's taking over and who's going to do the admin.
Should we take a 15-minute break now? We'll take a 15-minute break and then meet back again. Thanks.